Pema Siddhi Hung, Om Ahung Benzaguru Pema Siddhi Hung, Om Ahung Benzaguru Pema Siddhi Hung. Welcome everyone to my Sunday Dharma talk. I hope you can all hear me okay. Let me just give you my information. If any of you are new, there's my personal information. I'm not going to go through it for you by going through it. I will mention one little news item. Kronecker Press has published a new book entitled The Authenticity of the Early Buddhist Texts by Bhikkhu Sujato and Bhikkhu Brahmali. It's available in paperback from Kronecker Press, which is, I'll put it in the chat anyway, kroneckerpress.com. So that will be the only commercial solicitation for the evening. Welcome. As always, sometimes these talks are longer, sometimes these talks are shorter, and today is going to be a shorter one. The Mahagovinda Sutta, number 19 in the Digha Nikaya. We're just past the halfway point in the series of talks on the Digha Nikaya. And there wasn't a lot of content that I was able to draw much upon in this sutta, so I expect this talk will only take about 30 minutes. Maybe we can fill up some time with questions and answers, or perhaps we'll just leave a little early today. In any case, in this sutta, the Mahagovinda Sutta, the Buddha is staying at Vulture's Peak, called Gridraj Parvat in Rajagaha, the same place as the opening of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, as you may recall if you attended my talk on that sutta. And located near the village of Devrajnagar, it consists of 4 caves and is unique in the world for the large number of vultures that congregate there. It's a sacred spot in both Hinduism and Buddhism. And this particular cave that you see on the slide behind me is called Buddha Cave, and I imagine is the cave where he was believed to have sat in meditation, hence the name. There's a vulture's view of Vulture's Peak. Shortly before sunrise, Panchasika appears as a splendid radiance. And there he is. Did I say who? No, I didn't. I didn't say who. In any case, I'll have to look that up. I don't recall now. In any case, to the subject of the if you read the sutta, you know who. So shortly before sunrise, Panchasika appears as a splendid radiance to the Buddha, I believe. And there he is. Sanat Kumara. This is the same Panchasika as in the previous sutta, described as a young boy beloved by the Devas. Here we learn that he is a Gandhava, an attendant of Dhritarashtra, the guardian of the East and the god of music, harmony, and compassion in the realm of the 4 great kings, which you'll probably recall is the Deva realm next above our own. So if you attended last week's talk, then you'll be very familiar, the last 2 talks actually, you'll be very familiar with this story. Because both of these suttas, both the last sutta and this one, build off of the assembly of Devas, which you'll recall from two sessions ago. Sanat Kumara chooses to appear to the Devas in the realm of the 33 gods as the lowest rank of Deva. Panchasika is also a messenger between the realm of the 33 gods and the 4 great kings, who together monitor human progress, and he's probably a musician also. Gandhavas are aerial, associated with flowers and trees, and dwell in the scents of bark, sap, and blossom, rather like fairies. His name means 5 top-knots, alluding to the style of his hair, which he wore in the same style as when he died as a young boy. Panchasika has some of the characteristics of Mercury in the Greek pantheon. Panchasika comes to the Buddha in his capacity as a messenger. So yes, he's appearing before the Buddha. I didn't make that explicit, but yes, that's what he's doing. He comes to the Buddha in his capacity as a messenger, conveying to him the same story that we heard in the previous 2 suttas, in which Sakka, The chief of the realm of the 33 gods praises the Buddha in 8 statements, in which he declares that the Buddha is 1. Supreme among teachers in compassion for the world. 2. Supreme amongst teachers for the quality of his Dharma, described as, quote, here and now, timeless, inviting inspection, leading onward, to be realized by the wise, each one for himself, unquote. A description which we've already encountered in Sutta 18, and so I won't go into an explanation of those points again today. 3. Supreme amongst teachers for the quality of his moral and ethical teachings. 4. Supreme amongst teachers for his explanation of Buddhist practice. 5. Supreme amongst teachers for the quality of his Sangha. 6. Supreme amongst teachers for good reputation without conceit on his part. 7. Supreme amongst teachers for the mutual coherence of his speech and his actions. So I don't recall which one was that. 5. Supreme amongst teachers for the quality of his Sangha. 6. Supreme amongst teachers for good reputation without conceit on his part. 7. Supreme amongst teachers for the mutual coherence of his speech and his actions. A quality that you'll remember from Sutta 16, where King Ajatasattu attempts to use this quality of the Buddha as an oracle to divine the outcome of his war with the Vajjayans. And finally, 8, supreme amongst teachers for certainty of mind. In response to such praise, some of the gods exclaim, quote, oh, if only 4 fully enlightened Buddhas were to arise in the world and teach Dhamma just like the Blessed Lord, unquote. You'll remember, of course, from the story that this is an ancient Buddha that is being discussed, not our Buddha, not Gautama Buddha. In the last talk, I did suggest that this sutta, in which this assembly of the 33 gods is documented, describes a previous kalpa. Kalpa, or kappa, of course, referring to a world cycle or a world age. However, this passage suggests that the Buddha at that time was, in fact, Kakusanda, who was succeeded by 3 Buddhas, Kunagama, Kassapa, and Gautama, and who is to be followed by Maitreya, 5 Buddhas in all, Kakusanda plus 4 more. Such an age is both rare and fortunate. So this story seems to be a legend, if you like, or a myth concerning the origin of our own fortunate age. This was the Buddha being referred to, who's never named, or hasn't been so far, is probably this first Buddha, the original Buddha of our age. Saka sets forth an important principle of Buddhist cosmology, which I believe is the first time this has come up in the Suttas, that only one Buddha can exist in a single world system or at any given time. What this means in the context of modern cosmology is somewhat obscure. Is a world system a Dharma age, a planet, a solar system, a galaxy, or a universe? All of these are world systems, or kappas. In fact, the word kappa can even refer to the lifespan of a single individual, which presumably is not what's being referred to. The appearance of Sanat Kumara is similar to the previous suttas, and I will not repeat myself here. Some of the material in the sutta is derived from the original story 2 suttas ago, which we've discussed already, so I'm not going to go into it again. Instead, Sanat Kumara asks the 33 gods, quote, for how long has the Blessed Lord been one of mighty wisdom? Unquote. Almost the phrase man of power, mighty wisdom. An interesting point to note. And proceeds to tell a tale based on that theme. So, like the previous sutta, this sutta is, the initial part of this sutta is really a little more than a segue into the main point of the sutta, which is a story. The story today is that of King Disampati. Disampati probably, whose religious advisor or Purohita was called the steward. The word is Govinda, literally cowherd, which is an epithet of Krishna. Both Krishna and the Buddha are regarded as manifestations of Vishnu in Hinduism, and there are other conflations of Hindu gods with the Buddha. For example, Vithoba, another manifestation of Vishnu, Krishna, as well as being associated with Shiva. Not a common name, so I'll just put it in the chat. There it is, Vithoba. Although this was a Brahmanic religious office, the steward was also an expert in business and managed all of the king's worldly affairs too. The king's son's name was Renu, and the steward's son was called Jotapala. Together with 6 other Kshatriyas, or members of the warrior caste, you'll recall the Kshatriyas or warrior caste are the ruling caste in northeast India, compared with the Brahmanic caste, which is the ruling caste in western India at that time. Together with 6 other Kshatriyas, they formed a group of 8 friends. The king was becoming something of a dissolute. And just when he was beginning to abandon himself to the pleasures of the 5 senses, one gets the impression he was getting on a bit in years, the steward died to the king's regret. Renu recommends to Disampati that he allow Jotapala to manage his affairs, to which the king agrees. Jotapala fulfilled this royal function well and became known as the Great Steward. As Disampati became decrepit with age and entered into his dotage, Jotapala went to the 6 friends and encouraged them to approach Renu and suggest that he share the kingship with them after his father's death. After Disampati died, the Kshatriya assembly, another sign of nascent democracy, the king did not appoint his successor, but rather he was appointed by an aristocracy of nobles, or an assembly of nobles, appointed Renu as a constitutional monarch, after which, like his father, he abandoned himself to the pleasures of the 6 senses. Clearly ran in the family. Jahampati sent the 6 nobles, Jihampati I should say, sent the 6 nobles to remind King Renu of his duty. Therefore, King Renu had Jahampati divide his kingdom, which appears to have been identical with the entire Indian subcontinent, into 7 parts, the central part for himself, and the remaining 6 parts for the 6 nobles. These became known in what is perhaps something of a conflation of history. These became known as the 7 Bharat kings, Bharata being the original term for India. After Bharata, who's shown in the slide, the mythological emperor and founder of the Bharata dynasty. Interestingly, there's a tradition, if you like, in Indian culture of a world emperor or continental ruler, which the Buddha had the choice of becoming had he chosen not to become a Buddha. However, interestingly, during the time of the Buddha, this idea did not exist as such. It was the period of the 16 Mahajanapadas, which were the great republics, as they're called, the great states of that time. But in the century after the Buddha, as you will know if you watched the YouTube video on Magadha that I distributed last time, Magadha, which was already growing during the Buddha's time, expanded into the Nanda empire, and did in fact establish a very large, although not continental, empire in northeast India, and absorbed all these 16 Mahajanapadas, or most of them. So the political situation in the century after, less than a century in fact, 50 years or so after the Buddha's death, changed significantly. And this is actually one of the arguments for the authenticity of the Pali Canon, that the political situation that the Pali Canon describes was very peculiar to the 5th century before the Common Era, and certainly not true of the 4th century before the Common Era. which is one of the arguments for its legitimacy and that it actually preserves accurate historical memories of the Buddha's time. In any case, they became known as the seven Bharat kings, Bharata being the original term for India, after Bharata, the mythological emperor and founder of the Bharata dynasty. Thus, Jotapala became the great steward of the seven kings. He also taught the mantras to 7 notable Brahmins and 700 advanced students. Jotapala, the mantras are, of course, the religious ritual formulas of Brahmanism. Jotapala himself became so notable that he acquired the reputation of conversing with God, or himself, or Brahma. Although this was not in fact true, as the Sutta tells us, Jotapala decided to undertake the metta meditation, and I don't think anyone here needs to be explained to what the metta meditation is all about, the Buddhist meditation on loving kindness, during the rainy season, which extended from July to October, to try to be worthy of his own reputation. The metta meditation is, of course, the meditation on loving kindness, which the Buddha introduced in Sutta 13 as the way to achieve union with God or Brahma, or admission to the Brahma heaven, the goal, of course, of religious Brahmanism. We encountered the famous metta meditation in Sutta 13, so I don't think we need to go into it further here. Therefore, Jotapala took leave of his 40 wives, that's 40, and withdrew to a building that he had built, a home, a lodging that he had built east of the city, to withdraw into meditation, and no one came near him except to bring him food. Keep in mind, this is a wealthy individual. So this is another example of a wealthy individual, a wealthy, privileged, and powerful individual undertaking the spiritual life, without necessarily entering into homelessness. However, at the end of this time, the great steward has not experienced any success, perhaps because he hasn't renounced his life of privilege, in a splendid, glorious, and divine vision. Jotapala offers, that is to say, he's not experienced any success and he's dissatisfied, whereupon Sanat Kumara appears before him in a splendid, glorious, and divine vision. Jotapala offers Sanat Kumara a seat, water for the feet, and cakes to who in turn offers Jotapala a boon. An archetypal mythological theme that we find repeated worldwide, the spiritual being who appears to the human and offers him a boon, often in exchange for something offered. And it's interesting, this theme of the divine appearing and an offering being made to him, and then a privilege or benefit being received in exchange, because we see this underlying the Nyandro practice of mandala offering in Tibetan Buddhism. The mandala offering practice, I think it's come up before in the talks. I think I've shown a picture of it actually in a previous talk, but you can find, if you're interested in exploring this connection more, look up Nyandro and mandala offering in YouTube, and you'll find lots of videos on this topic, because it's one of the core practices of Tibetan Buddhism, especially for Westerners, since most Westerners are made to go through the Nyandro practice as a kind of qualification for further teachings in the Tibetan tradition. So it's interesting to see that this Tibetan tradition also originates in the Pali Canon. Jotapala asks Sanat Kumara how mortals can achieve the deathless Brahma world, noting that he asks both for himself. How do you spell that, please? I knew someone was going to ask me that. It's Nyandro, Ngondro, and the specific practice is called mandala offering, or the mandala offering ritual, which can be practiced on its own or in the context of Nyandro. So, where's my water? Give me a moment. Jotapala asks Sanat Kumara, I should warn you, by the way, my mouse is flashing. I have a wireless battery-powered mouse, and it's flashing a red light on the back. I'm hoping we can get through the talk before my mouse fails. Otherwise, we might have to take a break. So Jotapala asks Sanat Kumara how mortals can achieve the deathless Brahma world, noting that he asks both for himself and for others. Squeaky clean, this guy. This is, of course, the Brahmin view of the Brahma world, not the Buddhist view, which holds all worlds and their inhabitants to be subject to mortality. This leads to some interesting metaphysical issues in the context of 31 planes of existence, but I won't get into that detail today. Sanat Kumara replies that to reach the deathless Brahma, to reach the deathless Brahma world, he must abandon the householder life and enter into homelessness, abandoning his possessions and family. He must live alone in the forest, at the foot of a tree, in a mountain glen, in a rocky cave, in a charnel ground, a graveyard, in the jungle, a cremation ground technically, in the jungle or in a heap of grass in the open. The charnel ground practice is also practiced in Shaivism, incidentally. Develop concentration or concentrative meditation or meditative concentration, whatever term you prefer. Suffuse the whole world with living kindness, that's metta, and abandon anger, lying, fraud, cheating, avarice, pride, jealousy, coveting, doubt, harming others, greed, hatred, stupor, delusion, and lust. Jotapala goes to the king and resigns his offers as steward. He's heard the voice of God. The king actually argues with him, and Jotapala is resolute. He's heard the voice of God. So the king declares that he will follow Jotapala into homelessness. He compares Jotapala to a beryl, a semi-precious stone that we've encountered before in connection with the precious jewel. The precious jewel, which represents Buddhist truth, is also a beryl. Here it's a metaphor for mindfulness. The 6 nobles, however, try to bribe Jotapala, thinking that he is like other Brahmins of that time, which does not give a very impressive impression of the Brahmins of that time, which the Buddha is always criticizing. First, they try to bribe him with money, and when that fails, they try to bribe him with women. Their attempt fails, and they too declare that they will follow Jotapala into homelessness if he is willing to wait 7 years. Jotapala refuses to wait 7 years, however, declaring that wisdom is won by means of mantra. The word is mantaya, which Walsh glosses as wisdom, but as he acknowledges in a footnote, the word actually means mantra. And this is an example of why it's important to pay attention to the Pali underlying these English translations, because he translates it as wisdom, and one might miss the specificity of the reference if one were not aware of the underlying Pali. The literal meaning of this word is, however, relevant here, because it reinforces other references to which I've called attention when we come to them, to mantra in the Pali Canon that clearly indicate Buddhism's recognition of the efficacy of mantra and the power of truth in addition to the salvific importance of wisdom. Finally, Jotapala agrees to wait 7 days. They bargain him down from 7 years to 7 days, and he agrees to wait 7 days for the nobles to join him in homelessness. And interestingly, that 7 days corresponds to the 7 days that elsewhere the Buddha says is the minimum time that one must spend in meditation in order to achieve enlightenment. At the end of the 7 days, Jotapala shaves off his hair and beard, dons yellow robes, and enters into homelessness. Note that putting on robes, which we associate with Buddhist monasticism, even to the specificity of the shaving of the head and the color of the robe, was in fact adopted by the Buddhists from the Samanas, and that such entering into homelessness did not require any organizational approval, but was a purely individual decision. This, of course, is exactly what the Buddha did, or Gautama did before he became a Buddha, what the Bodhisattva Gautama did when he abandoned the householder life at the age of 29, there being no Sangha for him to join. He simply made the decision, shaved off his hair, and put on the robes. Thus, Jotapala and Gautama were both self-ordained, which is discussed if you're interested in the Buddha-Net Sutra and also in the Srimala Sutra, which was the original, therefore, the original form of ordination for the same reason that democracy was the original form of government in the Buddhist view. The 7 kings, 7 Brahmins, the 700 advanced students, the 40 wives, the several thousand Kshatriya nobles, and several thousand Brahmins, as well as several thousand householders, including some harem women. I'd like to find out the Pali word underlying that. I'm curious whether it is a euphemism for a prostitute. They all joined him in homelessness, so they all followed Jotapala into homelessness. Therefore, thereafter, Jotapala wanders the streets begging for food and practicing the metta meditation primarily. Because of his fame and influence, many people were born in a higher state. Remember, he had religious students. So many people were born in a higher state, ranging from Gandhabas in the realm of the 4 great kings to the Brahma world itself. And I discussed that curious reference to being born in a state above the human in the context of aspiration 2 suttas ago, when we talked about the original, of which the last 2 suttas are elaborations. That the human state was not included in that list, but the lowest state of the Gandhava. Whereas for an aspirant, of course, the human state is the most desirable, according to other suttas. Panchasika asks the Buddha if he remembers this story. And the Buddha affirms that he does, and that he was Jotapala in that life. So here we have, in the Mahagovinda Sutta, we have a past life story of the Buddha, which may also be found in the Jatakas, but in this case it's in the Suttas, and therefore there's no question as to its canonicity. And of course, if you've read the Pali Canon at all extensively, you know that this quality of the Buddha's remembering past lives is mentioned prominently all through the Pali Canon, whereas other psychic powers that are also theoretically available to him are not emphasized so much, if at all. But the recollection of past lives as a power of the Buddha is emphasized throughout the Pali Canon as a sign of his enlightenment. And presumably, therefore, even though we may question the specificities of any given story, in principle, I think we have to accept, if we ascribe any validity to the Pali Canon at all, we have to accept that this is in fact a true reflection of the nature of the Buddha's attainment. And as I talked in a couple of suttas ago, when this first came up, I did point out that the remembrance of past life, the spontaneous and unsought remembrance of past lives, is a phenomenon which is real. It does occur. It's a psychological phenomenon which is real and does occur both in some young children, a rare but a real group, and also in adults in response to a variety of triggers, including trauma, childbirth, physical or neurological injury, stress, emotional or physical stress, and Kundalini awakening and psychedelic drugs. So this is a real psychological phenomenon, this remembrance of past lives. It is not metaphorical. Sutta, However, he declares, quote, that holy life does not lead to disenchantment. This is the Buddha speaking. That holy life does not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to super-knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana, but only to birth in the Brahma world. Whereas my holy life leads unfailingly to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to super-knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. This is the Noble Eightfold Path, namely the right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, unquote. Last week, or possibly the week before, I think it was, somebody asked me what the holy life refers to in the Sutta that we were discussing at that time, and so here's your answer. It refers to the Noble Eightfold Path. We have, of course, encountered the Noble Eightfold Path before, and I'm not going to discuss it again here. Therefore, the Buddha reveals to Panchasika the Dharma that goes beyond Brahmanism, with its religious goal of rebirth in the Brahma heaven, much like Semitic religiosity, and leads to the qualitatively ultimate accomplishment. This is the Buddha Dharma, of course, that leads to the qualitatively ultimate accomplishment, transcendent emancipation from all of samsara itself. The Buddha further declares that those of his disciples who have, quote, fully mastered my teaching, unquote, achieve super knowledge, that is, gnosis, or transrational intuitive knowing, the destruction of the corruptions and uncorrupted freedom of heart and mind, that is, loving kindness and mindfulness. He then recapitulates the various gradations of attainment, which we've discussed in previous suttas, including 1, being reborn as a deva, 2, once returners, 3 stream winners, or stream enterers, achieved by the destruction of 1, the 5 lower fetters, 2, 3 fetters, and the reduction of greed, hatred, and delusion, and 3, the destruction of 3 fetters, respectively. The 3 fetters refer to belief in a self, doubt, and attachment to rites and rituals. Adding sensual desire and ill will to these makes the 5 lower fetters that are referred to in the Sutta. And that completes my talk for today. Thank you very much for your attention. We can discuss, or if you have any questions about the Sutta, we can discuss them. If not, we can proceed to the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. So I'll just grab the dedication of merit while you're thinking. So next week we'll be discussing the, what is it? This was the 19th, right? Let me just check. So this was the 19th. Next week we'll be discussing the 20th Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, 20 out of 34, called the Mahasamaya Sutta, which Walsh calls the Mighty Gathering. Devas come to see the Buddha. So we're more than halfway there. I've started to typeset the book that's going to result from these talks. It's already 200 pages in length. So the book, we're going to have a 400-page book by the time we're finished with these talks, and I'm going to also adding footnotes and elaborations. So it doesn't seem that anyone has any questions. So let's proceed with the dedication of merit. Whatever understanding, whatever positive forces come from this, may it go deeper and deeper and act as a cause to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all. Thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss Dharma. It is my pleasure and privilege, and I will return next Sunday here at Deer Park's Buddha Center Second Life at 2 o'clock Second Life time next Sunday. Thank you very much. Feel free to click through the slideshow if you want to take another look at the images. Namaskar.